Everybody, welcome back to Joe Sins Forever's Photos. Hope you had a great, Saturday night if you're watching this Sunday, like I'm recording it. We had a great time yesterday. My wife and I, we went out to the Pete Holmes comedy show. We had dinner first. But Pete Holmes is, a lot of people liken him to John Ritter. He looks a lot like John, kind of sounds a lot like John. Pete is his own unique comedian. But yeah, we had nice little seats. I surprised my wife with, it was surprisingly affordable VIP. It was like $100 for 2 tickets at Zany's. At least that's what I remember. Maybe it was $100 each. I'm not really sure. But we got to sit right by the green door where Pete came out. And of course, Pete walked out. He's waving at the crowd. He looks down at my wife and I and smiles at my wife and smiles at me, walks up on stage. And then my wife goes... Y'all can relate to this being Elvis fans. She says, "I love you, Pete." And he turned around and I said, 18 years down the drain, divorce. Just a joke, of course. And he goes, no, I'll be just a distant memory about 2 hours from now. I said, I don't know. You don't know her, Pete. I'm just kidding. It was just a joking little thing. And so we go through the comedy show, and he's a very, very funny. He's a very, very clean comedian. At the very end, he says, "Bye, thanks Nashville," and he looked at us and said, "Thank you both for coming." Came down, I gave him a nice little handshake on the way down the stairs, and my wife gave him a big old hug. It was a special treat for my wife, she's a huge Pete Holmes fan, as I am. He's got a show called Crashing. So if y'all, it could be on Netflix. It was on HBO when we watched it, but it's called Crashing. And then there's the Pete Holmes show. So hey, check him out if you like comedy and you like a fairly clean comedian. Let's get to reading, okay? Thank you to those that have just joined recently as subscribers, longtime subscribers, new members, existing members. Hey, I got my this other phone here. I can actually read out a couple new members before we get started. Thank you for your emails you've been sending me as well. All right, so the newest members that we have that have signed up to be a member, and really there's not a whole lot that comes with a membership, I have to say right now. It's just kind of helpful to support the channel, kind of like a super thanks, but it's a monthly thing. The newest members, I know y'all like get into reading, but I do want to shout them out if I can find them here. Here we go. L. Knowlton rejoined 2 days ago. Karen Babcock joined 6 days ago. Leslie Cook 16 days ago. And I do get to see your comments. They pop up on the members only comments. I try to heart and like everybody's comments if I can, but I certainly see those first. Anyhow, that's enough of that. Let's get to reading. Where did I leave off? I left off, let's see here. Elvis had asked Joyce why in the world she was not telling the truth. And he said that he expected her to tell the truth because we've been talking nothing but the truth up until now. And so she had said, "All right, you're probably going to regard this as very unsophisticated reasoning for 1969, for being in Las Vegas, for being who you are in show business and whatever, but you said you wanted the truth. Well, the truth is that I would love to have dinner with you very much, but I just can't help feeling that you probably pick out a different girl to be with each night, and that this night it just happens to be me. And that's not what I want. I adore you, but no thank you." I waited, almost afraid of what he might say to my honesty, and this is what he said, and this is where I left off. "You mean you can't believe that I just simply enjoy your company? That's all I want to get to know you better." I didn't read right. He said, "You mean you can't believe that I just simply enjoy your company? That all I want is to get to know you better?" Yeah, there we go. Now I know how to read. One of the guys called over to him then about changing the Dusty Springfield album, but he just waved him off and went on. "Besides that, it's ridiculous. You ought to know it's not physically possible for me to be with a different girl every night and still do what I do up on a stage." Well, there's also the fact, Joyce said, that you're married. What does married have to do with this? I just want to be with someone I can talk to, you know. Besides, I know what kind of girl you are, even if you don't think I do. You should realize that with you, I would have to be a perfect gentleman. He paused, and then without warning, his face took on the sweetest, gentlest expression, almost cute. If there's a way to be cute and commanding at the same time. And then he said to Joyce, and that's a promise, baby. Well, that line did it. Of course, I caved in like a freshman congressman confronted by Tip O'Neill. Elvis would either honor his word or he wouldn't, and my every instinct told me that he was a man of his word. Why then had I been so reluctant? My fear naturally had more to do with me than it did with him, and a lot of that probably had been instilled through the terribly strict Catholic upbringing that Janice and I had endured. Our mother, who had been a dancer and a beautiful, vivacious woman when she was young, had for some reason tried to impose a relentlessly repressive regime throughout our entire adolescence. I'll tell you why, Joyce. Your mom was probably a bit scandalous, and maybe you didn't know about that, but there's only one reason that a mother tries to protect a daughter from that sort of life. Is because she's been through it somehow. That's not talking badly about Joyce's mom. Maybe she had a bad experience with some guys that, because she was maybe not held to a strict regime. But normally when you hold somebody to a strict regime, they go crazy and wild, don't they? For the most part. Okay, well, here we go. I guess Joyce answers it. I should have just read forward. I think it was partly her own experience of rejection and neglect that made her act that way. Our father was a sergeant on the Baltimore racket squad when we were growing up. Between the enormous demands his work made on his time and the disparity between his view of life and hers, their resentment and bitterness grew until the marriage was in just name only. It was not an example that encouraged Janice or me to enter easily into any relationship. Early on, I picked my father's skeptical view of the world. It's a tendency that has stood me in good stead during my years in Washington. I say picked up rather than learned, because teaching us was not in his makeup, really. He was just one of those fathers who would give his children anything except his time. But his liberal, hands-off parenting was a welcome contrast to our mother's strict discipline. Still, Janice and I always felt that music, excuse me, that the music and rhythm in our souls came from her. Without that feeling for music, it's unlikely that I would have been there in Las Vegas that night to meet Elvis, or to be asked to what would probably turn out to be just a nice, quiet dinner. Definitely a memorable moment in my life, but the kind of event that winds up as the story you're famous for boring the grandchildren with, nothing more. She didn't expect much out of it. I do want to go back to that line. I think it's very misunderstood, and it's almost impossible for children to understand this as children. Maybe you understand it more when you get older and have a little bit of wiseness to your life, but sometimes the parents that give you everything but their time, it's because they're working all the time, and it's not possible. The stresses of being a parent and providing, or two parents and providing, is an unknown to a child. Like we try to take our sons on walks. You know, we went into the place where my 18-year-old was working last night and had dinner and had him as our waiter. We try to do those things, but gosh, my wife and I work all the time, and we do try to set some time apart, like the golfing the other day. But we probably are as guilty as any of not doing it enough. We want to do it more, but I mean, we're going 7 days a week. I mean, here it is Sunday and I'm reading, right? But we're going to take our 9-year-old to the grocery store later and let him do shopping and pick out his food for the week. So we try to incorporate it, but I think with Joyce and Janice, that idea that the father tried to give them everything but his time, one of those parents. Sometimes, in order to have anything, to not live in a box on the side of the road, there's a fine line between too much and too little. Y'all probably know this. Some of y'all probably live this reality. And let me know. I'd like to hear it, and I think your fellow Elvis fans and friends would like to hear it as well if you've had those struggles. Chapter 3 is where we're at. Elvis was saying, I think maybe I was always like that. His voice brought me back to the present. One arm casually draped around my shoulder. He was talking while he watched an entire second wave of visitors coming in. Yeah, anything I ever wanted. I just have to have it. Anything I like. It seems like I just can't get enough of it. Like Dusty Springfield, I kidded. The same album of hers was just playing over and over and over again on the stereo. I really do like her a lot. And then Joyce said, I do too, and I was curious about what singers you enjoy, but don't you think it's about time to put on an Elvis record? Then Elvis said, haven't you heard enough of him for one night? Flashing that disarming smile. Never, I blurted out. Right now I feel like I could see your show every night and then go home and listen to your albums until dawn. Every night? The same show? Elvis said. Well, you do make changes from time to time, don't you? Charlie Hodge said he sure does, wisecracking as he passed by with a giggle. With a gaggle of young, attractive, and giggling girls he'd ushered in, and sometimes they're even the ones we rehearsed. Elvis came back at him. You just remember that one of them changes might be a particular guitar picker. He turned back to me. Now, honey, were you putting me on too? I solemnly raised my right hand. I swear I have never been so moved, said Joyce. Now, I could tell from his face that I had struck a responsive chord. He started to speak, but before he could say a word, he was whisked off to meet someone, and I found myself standing alone in a room full of strangers in a strange city, which is still how you might think of Las Vegas, even if you've lived there your whole life. Of course, I was actually acquainted with one person there, only he happened to be Elvis Presley. How strange is that? I found a chair and tried not to look or feel too much like a bump on a log while I watched Elvis submit to one of the ritual obligations demanded by his position, the laying on of hands and mouths, to demonstrate their loyalty. It must have started to make me nervous, and I remember having the distinct feeling that the room was closing in on me while the people in seemed to get further away, so I took out a cigarette. And Elvis, spotting my action from halfway across the room, slipped out from under all of that heavy flattery to swagger over and light it for me. I knew he was trying to make me feel not so left out, and I truly do appreciate the gesture. It was the kind of sweet, simple, and considerate act that seemed to be instinctive with him. There was a basic niceness about him that contradicted the popular held view of superstars and their inflated egos. The fact that he had no qualms about showing small kindnesses in front of his court of sycophants seemed to me to confirm the down-to-earth genuineness of this man. When I thanked him for the light, he gave my shoulder a reassuring camaraderie pat before returning to the gaggle of gigglers. I sat and suffered, watching him endure at their hands an interminable period of the most repellent simpering and fawning, throughout which was courteous good humor and cheerful decency never once flagged. So, let me just make a comment about this. Now, I don't know whether, it's the author or Joyce. I kind of think it's probably the author that took some of this to the fans coming in, bringing the scrapbooks, the autographs, where it says here, I sat and suffered watching him endure at their hands an interminable period of the most repellent simpering and fawning, throughout which his courteous good humor and cheerful decency never once flagged. I don't necessarily like those people being described as a negative. I think Elvis loved that, and I think that they have every right to be there in the room with Elvis. It's like their one chance of being around him, so you are going to be very fawning about it. And anyway, so I don't know. Just curious in your thoughts. I'm not certainly not trying to put down the author or Joyce here, but there's been a couple comments that I haven't liked in this first couple chapters. And maybe to her, she wouldn't want that, and she just found it kind of repelling. To Elvis, he loved it. He loved the honest communication of his fans, how much they needed him, wanted him, loved him. And he showed it back. It was the courteous good humor. It wasn't the courteous good humor and cheerful decency. It was Elvis Presley being sincere back to them. So, until Paul Anka walked in, that's where we continue. The diminutive Canadian was accompanied by a young blonde woman of so classically molded beauty that it drew all eyes to her instantly, and kept even me from noticing for a moment the other person with them. That other person was Anne Marie. Now, I wasn't surprised she had kept our original commitment and had gone to meet Paul Anka. I was, however, very much surprised that she had brought him back to Elvis's dressing room. I was not the only one paying attention to the newcomers. It was Anka, wasn't it? I looked over and caught a hint of disdain in Elvis's curled lip grin. I timidly shrugged my shoulders and gave him a weak little nod of my head. Elvis fixed me with a stare, raised one of his eyebrows, and said, "All along, those people you promised to meet, it was Anka?" He shook his head. "Impressed with Anka, huh?" I wanted to say I wasn't impressed with anyone just because he was a star, but for the moment I could only hold my tongue. Elvis greeted Paul Anka warmly, but with, I detected, just the right touch of reserve to remind him who was the star of stars and who was only the satellite. It was only the first inkling I was to have that even though the just folks element in his makeup was genuine, Elvis Presley was never unaware of his status nor the public role it required him to play. Anne Marie took me aside to explain why she had returned. Unfortunately, I wasn't listening. Out of the corner of my eye, I had noticed a beautiful blonde woman make a beeline for Elvis. This left Paul Anka with little to do except pay attention to Anne Marie, an option he seemed to find appealing and continued to pursue when Elvis beckoned all of us to come over and join him. Elvis did have me sit next to him. Paul Anka was on my other side, and Anne Marie was positioned on the other side of Anka. The blonde woman, disdaining all this complicated choreography, nonchalantly draped herself around the chair on Elvis's right. Now, a five-way conversation was thus inaugurated among us, which turned almost immediately into a three-way conversation, as the blonde woman had words and eyes only for Elvis and made no bones about monopolizing our host. Being an impeccably well-bred young lady, I naturally did my best not to overhear any of the remarks they exchanged, unless I was actually doing my best to overhear them. I suddenly found myself in an awkward position, caught between wanting desperately to eavesdrop on their conversation and wanting equally, if not desperately, to conduct myself like a worldly, confident woman. I felt I had no right to eavesdrop, since this new arrival on the scene definitely looked like she was putting a move on Elvis. I mean, that was okay with me. I had no claims on him. But if she was going to replace me on that dinner date, I wanted to know it in advance so I could do the canceling. Now, I wouldn't have blamed Elvis if he'd made the switch. The woman was quite exquisite, no question about it. Although I thought it could be considered pushing it a little bit that she wasn't wearing any shoes or stockings with her long, slinky black gown. Interesting. No shoes. Reminds me of Dina Carter. You know, the country music singer that sings Strawberry Wine. She never wore shoes. I wonder if Dina Carter got this. We'll find out. I'm just curious. You don't hear very often somebody not wearing shoes. But I wasn't going to nitpick. I felt I could be big about things. After all, it wasn't my idea to even have dinner with him. To put things in a proper perspective, Until a few hours prior, this man had been no more to me than a voice off a hunk of spinning bottle. He'd been a sound emanating from the radio, a phantom flickering across the screen. Now, I'm not denying the excitement and appeal those images had held for me during my formative years, nor am I even trying to deny that there were still some carryover that excitement and appeal into my adult life. Now, how could I? I've already pointed out that the memory of the initial impact enhanced the experience of meeting him now and seeing him perform live. Nevertheless, I felt I had always been the kind of person who could differentiate between image and substance, between fantasy and reality. Finding myself caught up in a situation that threatened to obliterate the thin line between them triggered my basic survival instincts and made me super cautious. Now, what I'm driving at is simply that since I had managed to live 24 years, 8 months, 1 week, and several hours without ever imagining I would meet Elvis Presley, I knew that I would certainly be able to live the rest of my life equally as well if it turned out that I didn't have dinner with him. For one thing, I had not enjoyed being mistaken for his wife. Not that I wasn't well aware of how gorgeous Priscilla Presley was. Just kidding. Some of y'all were like, But somehow it had bothered me, and I just didn't feel like being gracious about it. My mood was not lightened any by the first fragment of the Elvis blonde woman conversation I did catch either. It was a proposition pure and simple. That stunning woman informed Elvis that she wanted to stay the night with him. I began racking my brain for a graceful exit line. So you stood me up for Presley, right? It was Paul Anka, with a not particularly graceful entrance line. One that was designed to send a little zinger of guilt. Funny you should say that, my retort was sharp. I was annoyed, not with him, even though this interruption prevented my hearing Elvis's response to the woman, but with myself, because in spite of my resolve, my heart had already begun to ache, wondering what Elvis's answer would be. Because when you walked in here, I continued, Elvis accused me of wanting to stand him up for you. Paul Anka's mouth opened, whether in astonishment or just to respond, I never found out. Before he could say anything, the blonde woman's charming little voice, French accented and husky with sax, totally captured my attention. She says, I think there's one best way to discover, was all I heard her murmur before she knelt on her chair, leaned over, and whispered in Elvis's ear. Elvis shook his head, and my ache subsided. She slid off the chair. When she stood up, she seemed to do it in waves, each one more sinuous with carnal promise than the last. In France, she said, there's a saying, even the most beautiful woman cannot offer more than she has. She smiled and was gone. She had walked right past me, and this, together with having, for the first time, heard her voice clearly, finally combined to send a recognition signal to my brain. I was amazed. I hadn't known her straight away. I had seen at least 3 of her pictures. Umbrellas of Cherbourg, Repulsion, and Mayerling. Some people were already calling her the most beautiful woman in the world. Catherine Deneuve. It's Deneuve. Catherine Deneuve, maybe. What do you suppose she whispered to Elvis? The expression on Paul Anka's face was all too innocent. What do you think? He asked, barely bothering to hide his amusement. I think it's embarrassing, I replied evenly, and probably standard operating procedure in this world. But you would know more about that than I would. Touché, he conceded and turned for consolation to Anne-Marie. Huh. Gonna have to look up this Catherine. In fact, I'm gonna do that right now. Y'all should do as well. Catherine Deneuve. Deneuve. Maybe you can't, because you're on your own device. But I'm going to see if she's really as pretty as Joyce says she is. Deneuve. Let's see here. See if I can find some pictures of her from like 1970. I guess this would be what, 1970-ish, 71. Let's find out. I'm going to show y'all. Oh, before we move on, who this blonde bombshell was. I mean, I personally, she's obviously a movie star, but you know, I mean, she said, "I want to stay with you, Elvis," and she certainly said it much differently than that. That's kind of a pretty enough picture of her. Do y'all know who this is? I mean, have you seen her movies? Wonder if she's still alive while we're at it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I don't find her attractive, but that doesn't mean that she's not, or that she wasn't famous, but interesting. I wonder how she felt about having her story told about being turned down by Elvis from Joyce. I mean, maybe she told the story herself, but Joyce was there. She heard the proposition and how she left. And she left Paul Anka too. She wasn't there for Paul, was she? All right. My thoughts drifted to what kind of consolation Elvis might be expecting now, in spite of his protestations about just wanting to have dinner and his only desire being to get to know me. I mean, I have always had a reasonably high opinion of my talent for making interesting table talk, but compared to the ultimate favors of Catherine Deneuve, however, this little pleasant attribute would seem to finish a distant second, even if I were a combination of Bertrand Russell and Groucho Chico Harpo rolled into one. Especially to a man who was used to having women drop like flies at his feet, unless, hold on a second. Didn't that phrase contain the clue? Wasn't it possible, I thought, that Elvis Presley might be satiated with easily available women? That it would be a welcome change of pace for him to have a casual meal with a woman who wasn't blatantly offering herself to him like Catherine just did. I began to examine the possibility that he had singled me out because he could tell that although I was a lady, I was also a good sport, the kind of down-to-earth woman he could relate to, and who wouldn't turn out to be just another heavy-breathing fan, panting to thrust herself upon his golden glow. There was also one more factor. It occurred to me as I saw him send Joe Esposito an almost imperceptible signal. Based on everything I'd experienced so far, I sensed that Elvis preferred being the aggressor and pursuer, and that he felt he was both charming and adept in that role. By this point, the King's retainers were already circulating throughout the room and requesting with extreme politeness that everybody get the not really, but leave, is what she said. I took a shot at standing up in waves too, and I managed to make each one sinuous with the promise of stretching, as my foot had somehow managed to fall asleep while every other nerve in my body had been drawn taut as a bowstring. Poised on one foot like a flamingo, I watched Elvis say his goodbyes. He dealt with the cloying homage paid him by adapting a special humility towards those who praised him so lavishly to his face, as though a screen of heartfelt and humble yes sirs, yes ma'am, yes sir, yes ma'am, might act as an antidote against the near toxic level of flatteries to which he was constantly exposed. If this is not the author and this is Joyce, at least so far in this book, is not happy with fans or just thinks that they're ridiculous. I mean, and once again, I think I've had a couple emails from people that talk to Joyce, and she says she's a very sweet woman. I tend to think this is probably the author that's kind of making it out like this. Like she said, this is how they were, you know, and I wasn't comfortable with it, and it gets turned into this, just kind of poetic writing that seems very condescending to Elvis fans or the people that came up that were brought in backstage. Excuse me. He turned then, and our eyes met. We had both made promises. I would keep mine and have dinner with him. As to his promise of being a gentleman, my thinking it through had helped me regain my composure and calm my insecurities to that area, so I walked over to him. The suite of rooms occupied by Elvis and his entourage on the 29th floor of the International Hotel invested the words garish and ostentatious with a new meaning. The rooms were designed in unbelievably vivid splashes of color. Now, Elvis walked me through the entire setup. The bedrooms, not surprisingly, were the most outlandish, and that barely begins to describe them. Each had an enormous round bed and mirrored ceiling. Their total effect was somewhere near an Edwardian bordello and a harem out of the Arabian Nights. I certainly had never seen anything quite like it. I wound up barely touching any of my food that night. I think it was because I was so foolish when I realized that the TTT dinner I had envisioned, the idea of which had so threatened me, that I saw it as compromising the complicated sense I had of my own self-worth and independence. It was in reality nothing more decadent than hanging out with the guys in the suite's dining room and munching on hamburgers. And munch, Sonny Joe, Red, Charlie, Lamar, Vernon, along with a man I hadn't met previously, Gigi Gamble, did with gusto. Hey, Joe. Elvis took 2 huge hamburgers to the good and obviously decided it was about time that he began to induct me into the group a little. Did you know Joyce right here's from Washington? I know that, E, Joe acknowledged, and I know she works on Capitol Hill. Yeah, but do you know who she works for, do you? Elvis turned to me. Tell him the name of the committee, honey. Well, I worked for the Armed Services Committee on the House side. Isn't the head of your committee kind of famous, Joyce? Charlie Hodge asked. Didn't you tell me you actually worked for an investigating committee? That was Elvis cutting in. Had I known then what I learned later about his interests, I would not have been surprised at his remembering that detail. Yes, that's right. I'm flattered you remembered, I said. But before turning back to Charlie, I am actually attached to the investigating subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee. And you're probably thinking of Mendel Rivers, who is the chairman of both the full House Armed Services Committee and my subcommittee as well. He's some colorful figure, ain't he? Sonny West interjected, and quite a drinker, I hear. He does have a reputation, I have to admit. I was surprised at how they had taken Elvis's lead and made me the center of conversation. All the more so since my own work seemed pretty ordinary compared to what they were a part of. You know, I said, a lot of us have begun to refer to Washington as Hollywood East. And I think some of the congressmen up there actually believe it. Amidst the laughter and general agreement that followed, Charlie Hodge said, yeah, if he could act as good as most of the politicians I've seen, we would almost have as many Oscars here as hamburgers. With that, Elvis planted his booted foot on Charlie's chair and sent it and poor Charlie sprawling, to the near hysterical amusement of everyone, especially Elvis. Hey, did she ever win one? Lamar piped up. An Oscar? Who's that? Vernon asked. The French babe, downstairs, you know, the one who didn't have no shoes. And Lamar's deep, slow, southern drawl trailed off under the withering looks being shot by Sonny and Red West. Looks designed, I think, to keep me from being embarrassed. I was touched. And then Elvis said, Joyce, what about President Nixon? I looked over at Elvis. It was charming to see him looking kind of apprehensive. Just like any guy on his first date with a girl might be if another girlfriend was brought up, and he wanted to change the subject. I really like the president, Elvis added. Did you ever meet him? Not yet, I smiled. I turned back to the others. No, I don't think she ever won an Oscar, I said. But she sure is awfully beautiful, I added, figuring I could afford to be magnanimous, and get everybody off the hook at the same time. Maybe there's some people that kind of look as beautiful, Elvis said, jumping on my line with both feet. But you know, I've always thought brunettes were much more beautiful than blondes. Makes perfect sense to me, I said, matter-of-factly. Well, that really broke him up. He laughed so hard that he nearly choked on his third burger. Watching him carry on, it occurred to me that I would definitely have to watch myself. It had nothing to do anymore with worrying about being put in a compromising position. I was long past that concern. Now, it was only myself, she said, I had to worry about. Probably it is only ourselves we ever have to worry about. If I were going to wind up compromised, it would be because I had done it to myself. That's what Joyce said. I was not awed by him. I knew myself well enough, even then, to know that part of his appeal was due to the same superficial glamour that many of the men I had already met in the political arena had possessed. I enjoyed the excitement that they were capable of generating, but in my heart I considered climbers who fed on and thrived in the limelight merely diversions who were not ultimately to be taken seriously. For me to truly take a man seriously, he had to be deeper, both more subtle and yet at the same time of great substance. On that first meeting, I saw Elvis embodied many more of the qualities I'd always sought in a man. He was an incongruous mixture of flamboyance and homespun simplicity. Throughout the evening, I had found him direct, down-to-earth, and genuine. He had never talked at me, always with me. I began to feel that even if this man had not been the fabulous Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, his effect on me would have been the same. It was a little before 5 o'clock in the morning when my last reserves of energy gave out, and I told Elvis I thought I should be leaving. Thank you for a wonderful time. Will you come back another night, Joyce? I was aware that he had reached over and taken my hand, but even more aware that his eyes, looking deep in my own, were reaching for my heart. There's a lot more we have to talk about. We didn't get too good a chance tonight. I'd love to, I said. Great. How about, why don't you call me and invite me? I just did. He seemed genuinely nonplussed. I looked away from his eyes properly. His lip curled in amusement. Etiquette, huh? Silly course I will. I'll call you about 7:30 Friday night. That's the Dunes Hotel you're at, right? I smiled and nodded. Gigi, he called. Take Joyce down and see her safe into a cab, please. As soon as I walked into my hotel room, I grabbed the phone and I began to call Janice. And then I stopped. It was too early. It wasn't the time of day either. Janice would not have minded being awakened, just as I wouldn't have, but were our roles reversed no matter what the hour. I meant that it was too soon. Even though it had always been our custom immediately to get in touch with each other if anything important happened. This time, somehow, it was different. It was a combination of circumstances, really. I knew my sister as well as she knew me, and I could anticipate her excited response and her questions. The problem was that I had no answers. I called her anyways. Although I find it slightly embarrassing to admit this, I never once left my hotel room that Friday. I was afraid Elvis might telephone early and that I would miss his call. The closer it got to 7:30, the higher my anxiety rose. At last the phone rang at exactly 7:30. With all the cool I could muster, I picked up the receiver, cleared my throat and said, "Hello?" Of course, I could recognize the unmistakable semi-drawl instantly, and my pulse quickened at the words. I mean, how do we get to exactly 40 minutes at the spot that y'all want me to continue in? And I want to continue too. That's it. Until next time. Hope you enjoy your Sunday. Thanks for spending some of it with me. And if you're watching it Monday or Tuesday, thank you as well. I know that the majority of these videos, they tend to get watched the same day they get released. And then there's a few views here and there, 20 or 30 the next couple days per hour. And then they dwindle down to 5 or 2. Kind of interesting how the YouTube algorithm is. So you probably are watching this on Sunday. So happy Sunday to everybody. Yeah. Looking forward to seeing your comments, your thoughts on this actress from France, and everything else that goes along with it. TCB TLC, this is Joe Sins with Rare Elvis Photos.